Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Tio, I'm a Cambridge alumnus, and my purpose in this video is to present to you my 3 best techniques that I used all the way throughout high school and university to remember what I read. In previous videos we've seen how to read faster or how to read more, but what point is there to that if you don't actually remember what you have read? Ideally, the point of reading is to acquire information that you can then later use and combine in order to help you solve problems in the real world, or help you think more deeply about certain topics, or sit those exams and get the grades, or purely and simply to know more. And in order to know, you need to remember. And actually, what many people who love to read regret the most is that earlier in life, when they were prolific readers, they didn't have the appropriate techniques to remember more, to take that information from the short-term memory into the long-term memory, and remember that information and be able to use it in 10 years and 20 years time as well. What point is there to reading 100 books a year if in 10 years you won't be able to remember anything from what you read? So let's dive right into the first technique, which is to highlight and take notes. Now, unlike other people, I'm not completely against highlighting what you read, but as a caveat to that, you might end up highlighting the entire text. As Thomas Frank says, you just end up changing the background color of your text without bringing you any benefits. So I'd suggest highlighting selectively and wait at least until the end of the paragraph to highlight only the most important sentences or concepts or ideas. The reason I like highlighting is that it allows you to initially organize your information without interrupting your reading too much. While it's not as good as taking notes to help you remember what you read, it's good if you're new to a text and you need to firstly read through it in order to make a sense of what it's about and what you could take away from it. The second step to that would be to start taking notes. Now, if you're also highlighting, you might want to read a series of interlinked paragraphs before you start taking notes, before taking that longer break to write down ideas. Otherwise, if you're not highlighting, you might want to stop after each paragraph to take notes. But make sure you don't take notes while reading at the same time as reading the paragraph after each sentence. You might find the first sentence very important, but then the second is equally as important and you need to write that down as well, and then the third one is more important than the first two, so you obviously have to write that down. So you'll end up writing everything down, and it will take you a lot of unnecessary time because you don't want to just copy the entire text. When taking notes, your goal is to slightly reorganize the information in a way that you can understand and that you can relate to, and that you know you will be able to remember in the long run. Now, this leads us into the second point, which is making summaries. Every time you take notes, you shouldn't just copy the text, but make a kind of a summary of it. That is, once again, achieved by reading a longer fragment of the text, like a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs, and only then taking notes, and taking notes in such a way that you're compressing as much information in as few words as possible. Now, what I used to do was to initially go through the text and make an initial summary of it, take the notes that I wanted to take after an initial reading, which would be quite extensive, obviously, because when you're new to the text, much information seems new and important and crucial to understanding the text. But as you're getting more acquainted to the text and its terms, you will start feeling like less and less information is crucial. For that reason, I would make a second summary of the first summary. So setting the base text aside, I would just take the first summary and then make a summary of that, take notes from that. And the way I would make the second summary in order to introduce some active recall into the process was to set everything aside and just make the second summary off the top of my head. And that would work out well sometimes, or less well other times, but you can always leave blank spaces where you know you've got gaps and fill those in afterwards by having another look at the text or the first summary. Now, I mentioned active recall, which is one of the best ways to remember things. What it essentially means is that instead of passively reading information that you've written down, that you've taken notes of, you actively try to remember that information and write it down on paper, or tell a summary of that to someone else. And by doing the active effort of remembering the logical order of the information and presenting it to yourself or to someone else, you will learn it much better, because much stronger connections will be formed in your brain when trying to explain it. Remembering by explaining things in simple language is also called the Feynman Technique, popularized by the American physicist Richard Feynman. To him, in order to make sure that you really understood a topic or the ideas from a book or from a particular text, you had to be able to explain it in concise and simple language as if it were to an 8-year-old. If you're able to successfully do that, then it's most probable that you really understood the topic and the concept, and that you're also able to explain it or use it in an exam. Now, to me, this technique is also based on active recall, because in order to explain things, you need to piece together all the different pieces of information that you learned while reading and while taking notes, and put them in logical order so that they fit into this puzzle or system of your explanation. By doing that, you'll also identify which are the gaps in your knowledge, and you could go back and fill those gaps before attempting another explanation, until you can perfectly explain it to someone in concise and simple language as if it were to an 8-year-old. If an 8-year-old can understand you, then it means you understood. Now, another way I like to use active recall personally is to summarize texts by using questions. Maybe not the first time around, but certainly during my revision, I would go through my notes once again and write down questions for each paragraph or each important concept. And after I'd written down those questions, I just go through the questions without any other helping material and try to answer them in my head. Or if I've got someone studying with me who is open to listening to me, then I would ask the other person to ask me the questions and I would answer them out loud. That's a very good technique to also use active recall, as well as hear your answers and make sure that you really understand it, because again, you need to explain it to someone else. When explaining to yourself, you're thinking more abstractly in images or not necessarily vocalizing it, but once you need to vocalize something, you need a logical order in your thoughts. Alternatively, if you've got no one studying with you, then you can also write down your answers if you've got the time, if you're not under time pressure. And it's also important to ask the questions in such a way that you don't have yes/no answers or very, very simple answers. By using questions, you can check facts on the one hand, but also more complex sequences of arguments on the other. So in this section, we've talked about making a summary, then making a summary of a summary, and also about simultaneously using active recall by making a summary through questions and explaining things to someone else based on those summaries. Now, my third technique for remembering what I read is spaced repetition. Spaced repetition essentially means coming back to the information over and over again at set intervals of time in order to transfer it from short-term memory to long-term memory. Now, there are several ways in which you can do spaced repetition. One of them is using Anki flashcards. Ali Abdal talks a lot about that, and I will cover that in a different video. But in this video, I'd like to tell you how I used it personally during high school and university to build on my highlights, on the notes that I've taken, and the summaries that I've made. At the beginning of my revision, I would make a list of all the chapters that I needed to learn for each subject. And then I would make a prospective revision schedule, which means setting out a timetable in advance for when you would study each chapter. Then, based on my experience from taking notes and making summaries, I would then mark the chapters which were more difficult and differentiate them from the moderately difficult ones and from the relatively easy ones. This way, you'll know which ones you need to revise more often and which you don't need to spend so much time with. This will also help you revise and improve your prospective revision timetable, because you would then know which ones you need to revise, let's say 3 times. That's usually how many times I revise the more difficult ones, or which ones you need to only revise 2 times, or the relatively easy ones which you can actually just go through once. Now, I'd also keep some flexibility here, because as you're revising, you might realize that some chapters are more difficult than you'd realized, and then you might need to allocate one more slot for that particular chapter in order to make sure that you revise it properly and that you transfer it to your long-term memory and also understand it properly. So I'd revise the very difficult ones 3 times, the moderately difficult ones 2 times, and the easy ones 1 time. Now, when you start revising, make sure you don't just revise the difficult ones at the beginning. Make a mix of them. Maybe on one day revise an easy topic, a moderately difficult topic, and a very difficult topic. You might want to spend 2 days on a difficult topic, and then go to the next one, the next difficult one over the next couple of days, and so on until you finished all the difficult ones, and only then go back to the first difficult topic that you revised, and that would then mean it would be the second revision, and so on and so forth until you reach 3 revisions for the difficult topics for all of them, and then all of these would be interspersed with the easy and moderate ones. Now, concerning the revision itself, I would again use what I had done before in terms of summaries and questions. Maybe use the same set of questions or have a look at the summary once again and make a new set of improved questions, or just improve on the questions that you've already got. And then once again, try to explain it to someone or to yourself in writing or in your head. I've found that the most effective way is to explain it to someone. So the Feynman Technique is a really good one, in my opinion. If you've got the chance to do that, I'd really recommend you go for it. And having study buddies is the best thing ever, because you can also take fun breaks in between and your revision will not be that boring. Now, if you're revising and you realize that you haven't had a look at a very important text and you need to read it quickly, then make sure to check out this video that I made about how to read faster, and also this one about how to make the time and the space to read more before going into the revision. If you like this video, then give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Subscribe to my channel for more study and productivity videos, and I'll catch you in my next one. Bye.